Welcome to the Monkey Dance Podcast. This is Ohan, and I'm sitting here with Velisar.
Yep, I'm Velisar Manea.
And do you want to, let's just start off with you telling us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a postdoc here at the Center for Early Childhood Cognition in Copenhagen. We are in the meeting room. My work is on this hypothesis about early infant cognition, that babies are not as egocentric as we imagined we are, but in some sense the opposite, which we call it altercentrism. And we're trying to figure out if this is true in the first place and how does it work.
Do you want to just start us off by telling us what egocentrism is and altercentrism is?
Yeah, so in some folk understanding of egocentrism, could be that you are sort of self-centered, you're ignoring others. In terms of understanding mental states, it would just mean that your understanding of other minds is limited or non-existent, or your motivation to understand them is limited, because it could be for different reasons, right? So it could be that you don't consider others' knowledge or mental states in your judgments about them. So that would be egocentric, and since Piaget, at least, we know that even relatively young kids, like 3-year-olds, cannot lie to you. They don't understand that you have a mind. They seem to barely understand that different people have different preferences. And more recently, since people figure out this idea of a theory of mind, that they don't do it, right? And then since about 20 years ago, actually exactly 20 years ago, since the first experiment on Nishi and Bajon, people figured out ways to test this stuff in young babies. And it's not, young babies started passing the same tests that 3-year-olds don't pass and only 4-year-olds pass. And nature doesn't work this way usually, that you get a capacity, you lose it for a little, and then you get it again. So then people started to try to understand what was this about, and it became a big topic, as you know, in developmental psychology. And there was this plethora of theories that are trying to understand these things. Some of it that because the data is different, some of it because the experimental designs are testing different things, and so on. And coming back to the idea of altercentrism, is that if you are over-relying on some aspects of the others, and I guess we'll come back to that, it could be that the self-perspective could be ignored or buried if you overvalue the cues of others' attention and you're figuring stuff about your environment based on others. So it's not like you are overly, empathetic or overly motivated to understand others' minds. You could still not have a theory of mind, but be altercentric because you're basing your judgments on others. I hope that's not too vague.
No,
but it has to make sense a little bit, because you cannot expect babies to have all the capacities that an adult have.
And so the gap that we see, do you think about it as sort of between infancy and around 4 years old? Do you see the gap as something sort of taking precedence over it? Like maybe children have the capacity, they don't lose the capacity, but it's outweighed by the egocentrism that is sort of beneficial at that time?
So that's how Vicky Southgate, our PI from the center, presented the hypothesis initially, that she wasn't very committal on the theory of mind question, at least back then in the original statement, and it was more like, well, babies can track attention to some degrees, they can follow gaze, they can remember better the objects that are gazed at by some agent and so on. But because they don't have a sense of self, they don't have the two perspectives. And relatively mobile babies They track where others look to be guided around their environment, and if they have if there's an advantage to the objects of attention, they mistakenly pass theory of mind task because they fail the memory control.
Right.
I hope I hope that's clear. If
Yeah,
not,
yeah,
I can
yeah.
explain.
Yeah, I mean, feel free to go into more detail about that. I think it's
Yeah,
useful.
so in a classical theory of mind, like Sally and task, you have Sally. Sally hides her toy in one of two locations, right? Then Sally leaves, and the sister comes and swaps the toy from location A, say, to location B. And then Sally then leaves, and then Sally comes back, and you're asking the children where will she look for her toy. And it's very obvious for us adults that she will look in the original location. But if you want to make sure that the test is valid when you're asking this for a kid, you have to make sure that they remember the location itself, independent of the mind stuff, right? So that means that you need to say where is the toy now? Well, and then you should answer this correctly, but where was the toy before? And then they also, 3-year-olds, answer this correctly as well. But then where will Sally look for her toy? They mess it up, and they actually not even answer 50-50, right? They answer with the actual location. So that's the strong evidence against theory of mind. Whereas what happens with babies, if we're right, is that well, you cannot do the memory controls. So you only get their expectations based on the behavior of the agent coming back, Sally, as it were. So, but what if the memory control answer, if you could ask it, would be the same as the expectation from the agent, because what they've learned into the what we call belief induction phase is not belief induction, is that they've learned something about the location of that object, and that's it. So that would be the main prediction in a Sally-like task for babies, that they misremember the object where the agent or the initial agent attended it to.
Right. So are you testing that based on something like looking time? Like, so you're seeing if, whether or not the children are surprised by the fact that it's in a location that was novel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if you want to see the obvious looking time prediction is that you want to see first, do babies have any memory at all? Because we're talking young babies of the location of an object. I mean, they don't pass A, not B tasks, right? So you hide, you transport the toy in one location, and then you reveal nothing, either in that location or where nothing was. And if they look longer to the magical absence, then it tells us that they remember something. Whereas in this Sally-like situation, they should be more surprised by the banal absence than the magical absence. And that's what we found now that we're here.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That was my PhD project.
Right.
With all sorts of controls.
Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And it's an important thing to be able to distinguish. Because then we understand, where they're looking, why they're looking, where they're looking, and the things that they're able to keep in mind, right? Which it seems like, so what do you think, maybe we can just flesh this out a little bit more, what do you think is going on between what you demonstrate and then the 3-year-old's inability to track Sally's knowledge?
Right. So what I would believe would be that it has nothing to do with theory of mind. It's not minimal theory of mind, and it's not a strategy to cheaply predict behavior, as some of the alternative theories that try to explain this data is. It's just you're a human baby, you have to learn more than any other animals. The trade-off that nature makes is that it endows you with a big brain early, but doesn't invest that much in building like big bones and muscles early. So then you cannot run experiments yourself to learn in the early life, but you can still get a lot of training data. and then because you live in
You're
the
a
world
social scientist, not an experimental scientist.
yeah. I mean, it's a less good quality data if you're not doing interventions,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But there's a lot of stuff that you could still learn that is just a lot of knowledge.
Exactly.
That is not that you don't need really critical thinking for, as it were, as an experimentalist. So, and also there's this thing that it just so happens that human environments are very different, and the objects in the human environments are very different historically and geographically. So how can you exploit this thing well? Well, the adults in your environment, they already know this environment. So if you're relying on them as sort of curators of information, then it seems like a good strategy. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we showed it as like a memory error, right? But that is a very unlikely and artificial situation. So then, just to answer your question, I would expect that what we're seeing is this sort of learning accelerator and nothing about theory of mind. They're not actually very social, I would venture to guess. Mm-hmm. So I mean, agents are the most complex things in your environment. You learn about agents all your life, but then there's lots of data with babies not understanding inertia, containment, very simple things about objects.
Logical operators, yeah.
And also that once they start intervening on their environment, they can do stuff like a 12-month-olds. If they can use a container, they already have an advantage over most animals, if not all, right? So that's kind of the layout of the problem, I guess.
Yeah.
So, and then theory of mind, like if you have a theory that is trying to explain both the infant data and the adult data, then for it to be a good theory, you have to explain both, right? How is it possible that you pass these early tests and not the later tests and then again? But I don't feel, with my view, that I have to explain what happens at 3 or 4, because this is just different. And I can just say, well, I mean, I cannot claim with confidence that this is pointing to an absence of theory of mind, but it's not a high probability idea, if that's the case.
Yeah, right. So it seems, because it seems probable to me that the ability for theory of mind, or something like it, right, is just overtaken by the ability to experiment firsthand. Like there is this ability to observe, and that develops, I mean, once the child can basically control the movement of their own head, then obviously observation just takes off, and they start learning very rapidly, and then they can start grabbing things and pointing, and then they can really experiment. I mean, grabbing is direct experimentation, but when they look or point, then they can experiment via observation. They can sort of control adults to do things and gather information. So then there's this, I think there's something interesting there about the overtaking of egocentrism. Just the ability to experiment is so salient. I think that a lot of people take, maybe don't even grow out of that firsthand knowledge thing into adulthood, but it's so salient, so tangible that maybe it's just overridden, like any other knowledge about Sally is overridden by the fact that I observed this and therefore I see it to be true. And because it seems so much like children take things for granted that they see, but their ability to sort of maintain the abstraction that competes with their direct evidence gets relegated to the margins.
Can you tell me a bit more? Because I'm not sure I understood the whole
So say the ability that infants display doesn't go away. It's just that another ability that's newer takes precedence, newer and more salient. And that's what children are displaying. 2-3-year-olds.
Yeah. The way I would put this, I guess, would be that if you are to build a curricula of topics that matches the most efficient way of acquiring information from your environment, it would make sense to not, as I was briefly saying, to not learn too much about other people when you don't understand containment and stuff like this. So then you are just using them as pointers. So then they've learned the basic stuff about the objects, and then you can add complexity and add complexity, and then some things show up or you learn them depending on where you stand, like the specific stuff about these special objects that are agents. So for example, you start to have to attribute intentionality in some sense, initially maybe as some sort of goals, and then after goals as preferences, and then you build up the knowledge that is specific and attributed to these agents, as it were. And somewhere there, theory of mind kicks in. I mean, we know for sure that this happens, but how, it's not clear. It seems like there's some stuff that is built in, because the correlation with other mental faculties are like the effect sizes are low, right? But it doesn't have to be at the beginning. That's all I'm saying. Mm-hmm. So they are learning about simple objects and simple phenomena.
So as they go about the world early on, or maybe just descriptively throughout the entire life, the human just kind of builds up statistical information. And there are objects that are less complex, have anything from no behavior to some behavior to highly complex behavior. You learn that, say, animate agents display like a higher end of complexity, and then human agents display the most complexity of all. Do you think that theory of mind is something like a threshold point where you understand and are able to maintain, say, the dynamics of the complexity that the human agent displays, and that spills into something like, okay, something that we might be able to describe as theory of mind?
I would think along these lines,
right.
Because at least if you think about the function, which would be to predict behavior, we use theory of mind very sparsely as adults, because you can predict by cues that you have in movement and so on, a lot of the behavior. So it seems like, okay, this is like game theoretically the best strategy possible, assuming a good model of the other's model, of course, but like you don't need it most of the time.
Yeah.
Right. So then, it could be something like this.
Yeah.
Coming back, sorry, because I
Please.
remember that I didn't answer directly the experimentation thing.
Please.
Like, there's quite a lot of evidence that point that you can just get good data, whether you call it statistical or not just statistical,
right.
In the first year of life. So
right.
babies direct their attention. They look, if you just do eye tracking and so on, they look up to the first patterns of high contrast and so on, but also the two patterns of high, that semantically makes sense.
Right.
So they are driving their acquisition. And also then there's on the other side of the parents or caretakers or people in general, all these adaptations towards the babies. They imitate the baby, they do the IDS and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So then there's a lot of stuff that you can get without doing interventions as we think about in an experiment, because let's say driving your attention wouldn't be an intervention per se.
Right.
But
right.
it's more than just getting pixel level data.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I see what you mean. So driving the attention of the child, you're not seeing necessarily as an intervention. You're observing what they do, and you're changing the, say, informational context. You're just seeing how they react.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just in that case, to put it more simply, there's a lot of stuff that you can get at the first try by just pointing your attention around the world, but rationally. Mm-hmm. And then of course you get much more if you just take a toy and try things that work and the things that don't work.
Yes.
Sure. But my point is that it makes sense to just have the first thing as well. It's not useless if you have the kind of trade-offs that you have in nature in general. Of course, ideally you would have all of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Like the curious robots, right? That they try things immediately, and then they learn pretty fast.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You have a big brain, so you don't necessarily need it.
Yeah, you don't need as many trials. You can learn, and then
you don't need that many trials. You have time. You're in a protected period. All the agents in your environment are trying to help you. They do teaching, they do communication, and you can extract information if you're right, even if they're not doing any of that, just by following them around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and because just as a side note, humans are probably the only species that do ostensive teaching. So clear demonstrative teaching of this is how this is, as opposed to just allowing the information transfer by a non-ostensive cues.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's your take on, say, mental state attribution? So do you think this is necessary to the model? Do you not deal with it so much? What's your take?
So for babies?
Yeah, for babies. And then I'd say even generally, if you're trying to build a model, like, do you take it as necessary to the ontology of the theory, or do you just take the theory to be descriptive and don't wade so much into mental states in general?
So what I'm going to say is not as thought as considered as I would wish to, but one thing that we're toying with right now is that it could be, if an extreme version of Vicky's theory, Vicky Southgate's theory, is true, that babies don't do attribution at all. So they don't have this move of this data structure at the beginning where they put things that they have to infer about others. So of course, like if you have a black T-shirt, I don't have to do it's in my object file of you, right? But anything about you, even if that you're a causal agent, wouldn't be, I guess, more than the core knowledge about causality. Like if you're doing any other type of causality, although there's some evidence at some point from Muntener and Carey, I think, that they have slightly different causal expectations about agents than objects.
The infants display causal. Okay.
Yeah, so you can, like, they don't expect that a moving object would change the state of another object behind an occluder.
Oh, yes, I see.
Changing its momentum.
Yes.
But if it makes it light up or breaks it or something like this, they are surprised. But they're not surprised if a hand does this thing.
Right.
That being said, if you don't have any attribution, maybe you can do something like this, a bit more of a complex causality, but you wouldn't do anything, not even goals. So what we see as goal attribution in the teleological literature, we just call it like this.
Right.
With our adult minds that see these kinds of stuff everywhere. But it's probably, if we're right, and I doubt we are, but we're exploring this idea, just let me reiterate this. It's maybe something like a simpler algorithm. They do, so usually the way people test these things, let me see if I got myself into trouble. The way people test these things is that they compare some relatively high level concept that has to be attributed to the agent, like a hand in the Woodward paradigm, against something extremely low level that is just remembering the same movement or the same pixel coordinates in the scene, as it were.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that maybe what happens in the high-level stuff could be explained by something of intermediary complexity. So they don't do just so in the Woodward paradigm, you have a hand or an agent picking one of two objects, like preferring one of two objects all the time. And then in the test phase, the objects are switched. and then the hand, and then you test the looking time to the same location versus same object. And babies at different ages with some controversy and so on seem to prefer the same object.
Seem to expect that the hand is going to prefer the same object rather than the same location.
And they're surprised by the more familiar movement.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Because they're sort of extracting information from that.
Yeah.
There's some concept of agent prefers this thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's attributing.
Exactly.
The preference to the
attributing the
agent.
preference to the agent.
Yeah, and then of course there are ways to explain away these kind of things that are sort of deflatory, that they can have some relation between the hand and an object and so on, but then you can they've tested for these things, right? So if it's the back of the hand that touches the object, they don't learn anything. I think this is probably not the most felicitous example that I've chosen, because this is relatively clear. But let's say that they understand that there's some relation between those two objects, and the relation has their expectations about what they learn about actions have some thing like the principle of efficiency. And the way we think about it is that you have like an algorithm that minimizes the distance to a final state. So
right.
You would go around an obstacle if there's an obstacle or not. If there's no obstacle, without really attributing a goal
right.
To this, you would expect the mover to compute the shortest available path through the map. That's how you would train, for example, like an NPC or something, right? And then in the Woodward paradigm, they learn some aspects of the action, but what we call goal or preference is, I guess, for now, because we don't have that much data about this, is that it's not anything like we would understand from preference. And it's just that they learn a relationship and an algorithm that tracks that relation, and not learning the low-level movement. One way to test this is to have the one agent systematically prefer or choose one object or approach one object, not to use mentalistic language, and then have another agent and see if they expect the same choice. There's a little bit of evidence on this one, and it's well, some people find the same thing,
right.
And if some people don't. But the thing is, if we would live at the time of this conversation in a world where you would find that babies expect the same thing from all the agents, the same preference, then they would have learned the value of the object, as we talked a couple of days ago,
exactly,
and not the preference attributed to the agent.
Yeah.
So in that case, there's nothing. You don't need attribution to predict the same thing. We are kind of stuck because we tried this, and we just wanted to see if they make a difference between two agents that look relatively different, at least to our human adult eyes, under the conditions where the animation is absolutely identical. So there's no other cue of individuality. And then we were hoping to pit this to do some preference paradigm with them. But there's absolutely no evidence in our data that they notice that there's any difference between the two agents. We had an agent saluting the baby over and over, and then we had a new agent versus the old agent doing the salute. It's absolutely the same.
Interesting. Yeah. So, and this is an important point, so I'm just going to reiterate it. So you have an agent showing that they are likely to go for a particular object. You're seeing that the infants learn that there's sort of preference, say, and then you introduce a new agent and you see if that new agent, if the infants expect that the new agent also displays a preference towards that same object. And if they do expect that different agents have the same preference, then you can assume that the infant has learned something about the object, about, say, it's edible or desirable or something like that. But if they don't, then you assume that the infants have learned something about the first agent, that the
Yep.
agent has a preference for the object.
I mean, in
Yeah.
the sense that a preference, by definition, cannot be a universal.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
So if you learn a preference, you need to individuate
In
someone.
a sense, I mean, you could say that there are preferences across clusters of categories, like subcategories. So you can say academics have a preference for good coffee.
Yeah,
You know,
but then
yeah.
The academics are the unit.
Exactly, that's
right?
what I mean.
So
So you
need
can
to
have like
individualize.
subcategories. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there is a case where you can say also, children assume that anybody who appears on the screen has a preference for this object and that it's not a universal. And so now if like later I in person display a preference for the object, are they surprised? I don't know. And it's hard to tell if it's like a schema-based information where they're relegating to subcategory. But
Right.
yeah.
No, I see.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the alternative would be that they attribute that they see it as a preference, but they see the different agents that they distinguish as the same class, and they treat them as the same class.
Yes, that's a good way of putting
Right.
it. Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly.
True.
yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But then you have some evidence in the infancy literature about preference attributions. I'm thinking about Luo's work, for example,
Right.
and some other stuff from Barjon's lab, I think, where they have no expectation if you introduce a new agent, as it were.
Yeah.
Or,
And this could be sort of an individual differences thing at a young age.
or
Right.
if you change the objects, I think, and then there's nothing to expect or something like that.
Right. And it could be just exposure. If a lot of the people, if the things that are salient to the child, the infant, are things that people in their direct environment, say both of their caregivers or however many caregivers they have, are attending towards the same types of objects and that's salient to them, they might develop this intuition, right? As opposed to, I could see a case also made where there's sort of an individual differences measure there across where you find it in some infants and not, just based on the different statistical learnings. And I think there's kind of an interesting thing that they can also make distinctions, because I do think infants can do this, and maybe demonstrating it within participant would be necessary. Maybe you guys did it already, but the ability to understand that some relationships are unidirectional. So there's a disposition that an agent has towards an object, but that object doesn't have a disposition towards the agent. There's a teleological preference there, right? Whereas if I understand that multiple agents have a preference towards the object, I can learn both that all these types of agents, this class of agents, has a disposition towards the object, but also that object now has some kind of attribute to it, right? Desirability or something.
Right.
So, and I think that's also an interesting aspect. Did you look at that, like the ability for infants to look at both and make the distinction?
Nope.
Right.
And that's very interesting, but I guess I would expect it to be later in life, where looking at relatively young babies, most of our subjects are 8-month-olds. What I'm saying about this attribution story would be in that ballpark. I mean, I would expect after you have joint attention to care enough about other agents that to start attributing something to them.
Right.
Because, but yeah, that makes sense. So you would just extract value, like the Soviet strategy. You see people queuing, and then you infer there's something valuable. That's what you're saying, basically.
Yeah. The Soviet and the hipster strategy. People are lining up for a new pastry. It must be a good pastry. But yeah. So because there are, I think it's interesting that that different labs have different findings on this thing, and I'm wondering if the same lab could work on finding why there might be the difference. You know, like if you say, I'm explicitly looking for a way to distinguish the context within which children have this type of preference or this type of inference that they draw, and the context within they draw this other type of inference, like one about the agents, one about the object. Can you, would you think that's valuable? I mean, does that make sense in what you're looking for?
I think that would be the next step.
Okay, cool.
If
okay.
we manage to falsify our suspicions about no data structure where to attribute stuff to agents, then it would make sense to look into these things. And so there's two concepts of attribution in two lines of work that are quite different in psychology. One is in social psychology, where you have like this attribution theories. Are people doing things intentionally? Are people doing things accidentally? Are people doing things because some internal trait that does this? Or are they forced by the specifics of the situation? Things like this. That's one stuff. And then the philosophers come and talk about mental state attributions. Are we attributing beliefs, desires as drivers of behavior? Both of them are trying to explain the causes of behavior, right? But with very different tools. Yep. Interestingly, I guess I'm not 100% sure where these two traditions meet would be the goal, the goal attribution,
right.
Where if it's like minimally mental, in the sense that it has to be, or not even mental, it has to be something about the agent you cannot see from perception.
Exactly. Sufficient complexity.
You don't see a goal, and then it is the driver of behavior, and it would speak to all the things that social psychologists care about. If this is intentional, if what kind of goals these types of agents have, or is this like forced by the situation to do this because it had to do Y and so on. And that's why it would be interesting if it will turn out that the goal understanding some things as goals is something that the babies can extract from the data, that there's something that is not built in. I don't have very high hopes for this, but it would be and also the bulk of the evidence is that they project goals to things. They are obsessed by goals, to name a paper. Right. But if they're not, I'm not very happy how I put it so far. But if these goals are nothing like our mature, like adult understandings of goals, and they look completely alien, then maybe the word goal doesn't
apply. Yeah, absolutely. Because goal also requires like a sufficient implication of mental attribution, and I think that there is. I'm usually pretty deflationary, not because I think ontologically that there's no ability to attribute mental states, but I like to stay agnostic on this. So I take more epistemic accounts and look at, don't really worry about beliefs and desires as much, even though belief is sort of a useful term for this, and look at it more as the learning of dispositions, right? And so you can account for sort of beliefs, desires, biases as this sort of dispositional learning and attribution. And so the mental state is just when you reach that some agent has a sufficient complexity in their output, then that kind of functions similarly as attributing a mental state to them, without all the weight of something like a modularity of mind.
Right. And also it's an efficient way to organize the information that you have about that agent and about agents in general, that there's some point where it's just the best structure to have like a disposition
Yes.
that is attributed. Yeah. So maybe let me try one last time to say something about these goals. So you can program game AI that is pretty basic with finite state machines. Right? So they can do some behaviors. You can, for an external observer, they would look like they are goal directed if it's a human. But if you would understand the structure of the state machine in them, then you wouldn't need the concept of a goal to do some behavioral prediction. And that may be enough to learn some relations in the world very early on without without being stupid and learning just the pixel coordinates,
Right.
like the same action to
Yeah.
the same side, but with learning something simpler than the mentalistic architecture already in place. And then you can just get to a bit more complex form of game AI. Not that this is what's happening in the brain, but it's just to show you that engineering-wise, these things are possible. So you can move from state machines to behavioral trees or to goal-directed action planning, and then you can do more stuff, more complex behavior. So if you put this into the mind of the observer, it is like an in principle proof that this is possible and that behavior makes sense without just throwing a huge statistical apparatus to these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind is an example, I think, from the late 70s, and I haven't reviewed it in a while. Maybe you remember it better than I do. But when they were at a stats conference, people were trying to, every year, better and better predict the flight patterns of birds. Do you know this? It was of starlings. And so every year there was a competition on who could build a model that had a visual representation of the movement of starlings, right? And then they'd rate the models. And the models, of course, got bigger and better, bigger and bigger, and better and better, and more complex. And then I think it was in 78, one programmer built a model with 3 rules, right? And I forget exactly what the rules were, but it was like if the agent ahead of you moves in a particular direction, then you have a statistical likelihood to move in this direction. And it was just 3 rules, and it was almost a perfect modeling of starling movement, right? And after that, the contest was over because it was basically perfect. Because once he pressed play, the first thing moved and everything moved really beautifully and formed these patterns. So that to me is also, not to just over apply it to everything, but I do think that there's a lot to learn from there, which is we don't need necessarily all the modular components of the mind, and we can move past to a point where we can maybe just make simpler assumptions that have more predictive weight.
I think Ian Cousin has an even simpler model of this recently.
Oh,
that
cool.
Is amazingly elegant and super cool.
What was the name?
Ian Cousin.
Cool.
They have this amazing lab somewhere in Germany, maybe.
Cool.
Where they put fish in VR and locusts and they model this flock behavior stuff. And they
really
found
dig
something super simple and super elegant. I think it's on YouTube, like a TED Talk that is
right.
amazing. Yeah,
amazing.
He was at the Dubrovnik conference 2 years ago and like floored everyone.
Oh, nice.
This. Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad that they're bringing in folks like that at the Cognitive Science Conference. I mean, that's yeah. So we had talked earlier also about the learning biases and how they play a role in kind of your work, also sort of induction and evolutionary constraints. How are you dealing with biases, learning biases in general? How does that sort of fit into your model, or do they play a role?
Yeah. So I didn't do many experimental work on this thing, so I'm not sure I'm qualified to talk about this stuff a lot. I can tell you a little bit about how, like some of my default expectations, my priors on these things.
Yeah, please.
It took me many years to do the demonstration that I told you at the beginning because we had 10 conditions and like
So you had 10 conditions.
yeah.
Amazing.
With
Okay.
different age groups, all these controls, it was
Wow.
kind of you're progressing very slowly if you're just doing baby works.
Methodological, slow methodological work is good.
You can think about many things because you have time, but
Yeah.
the empirical data is behind. Yeah, so I think I'm very sympathetic to this idea out of the following principle. Like it doesn't make sense to just put information into genes or put it into learning mechanisms because while there's always trade-offs between flexibility and speed, let's say, there's we don't really know the nature of the algorithms to say that it's that there's not a lot of margin to put a lot of useful core knowledge, for example, or to have on the other hand the learning algorithm learning extremely efficiently things. We don't know this stuff. So my bet now would be that I mean it's not very original, I guess, but would be that you would have some mixture of these things. So it makes sense that for things that only at the temporal scale of evolution, the evolution observes that you encode these things if they are systematic problems. So there would be like mental adaptations or core knowledge or things like this. Maybe the exact things that Spelky has are not won't be what we believe about core knowledge forever, but something like this makes sense to exist. And then of course the stuff that you can learn locally, but in your lifetime in different ways, you learn them super quickly. You need maybe a lot of experience to learn, and then that makes sense to be in your learning systems. And even those learning systems can be influenced by some inductive biases, because why not? If these things don't hinder you in the long term, and also what is the long term, you know?
Yeah,
like,
right.
You have the currency of 2 healthy kids.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are discussions against things like the nativism, so information that's built in. So it seems like while that was more popular before in the sort of cognitivism take in the trajectory of cognitive science, we've shifted away from that, and we're more into, well, maybe the structure produces learning biases, learning constraints that then facilitate learning rather than information itself or knowledge itself being built in. And so something between this sort of like innate knowledge and tabula rasa type of things where we're like, yeah, well, the structure itself of the mind might facilitate the learning, but you don't need knowledge so much in there. Aside from maybe something like, the initial capacities for like suckling or something like that,
Right. But what would be an example that would explain a bias towards recognizing like a snake shape?
Yeah. I mean, it could be that movement, which is because we don't have too many infants anymore who grew up directly around snakes. Although there's like cross-cultural stuff that shows that this is there, but it could be just that things that display abnormal movement, right? Like what is perceived as abnormal just produces that reaction, whereas direct exposure to it might be. It's hard to tell because it could be that even when you're exposed to snakes, you have some kind of direct expectation, but it could be that the adults in your environment are reacting to the snake. So I feel like you'd be hard pressed to find a human infant who is directly exposed to snakes and a lack of parents' reaction to snakes. You know,
But
yeah.
didn't people do these experiments in the lab?
People have done the experiments in the lab where they just show snakes.
So parents are not allowed to react.
Exactly, but that's like a novel reaction. Like if you have no exposure, then you might have a reaction based on the like atypicality of the movement, and then if it's not novel to you, you might still have a negative reaction based on adults' reaction to it. So either way, you might get a negative reaction, but for two different reasons. One is a learned negative reaction based on observing people, adults, and the other is a negative reaction based on the abnormality of the movement. I think snakes have a particularly abnormal movement for anything animate.
An abnormal movement.
Yeah.
So you just need to find something that makes an abnormal movement and compare it with a snake doing the abnormal movement, and then if there's no, and you expect no difference.
I'm wondering if there would be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because you get like because you get infants scared of the funniest things. I mean, you get infants scared of beards, you know.
Yeah.
You get like, so it's a bit of a tougher argument for me to believe that there is an evolutionarily programmed in fear of snakes, rather than a set of constraints or biases that make snakes particularly useful as a use case of like, yeah, how these biases demonstrate a fear of this thing that's unknown.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know how current this is and how this replicates, but one counter I can think of about what you're saying is that you show them spider-like shapes versus mangled spider shapes.
Right.
So there's no movement in there, and they look longer to the spiders, and they don't look longer to the other controls in these situations. So that would be like very old school, like you have a schemata for the dangerous thing, which is in there.
Yeah. That's
So what I would say is like, why not?
Yeah.
It's not that it's not like the genome programs spider there, but it doesn't matter. It just programs, you build the neuron this way and then this way, and then you organize these things this way, and it just so happens that if there's selection over these things and if there's an advantage, you would find some reaction. And it's not like babies react like other species. So if you look at apes, they react very clearly, non-controversially, right? But it could be that you have inherited like an inductive bias to learn more quickly about these things. That would also be rational, that human babies wouldn't just have an alert cry for the rest of the because they cannot do much and they are already exporting the security to their caregivers, right? But it could be that it makes sense to learn a bit quicker about some things. That is what I would expect. So as much as you would expect babies to learn about the particularities of their environment or the specifics by tracking others and so on, it could be that they also have some biases related to danger or things like this, if that makes sense to learn about them.
Yeah. I take it that the biases about danger, the way I think about it is that the simpler the organism, the more they lean on binary engagements with the environment, right? So you have, in the most rudimentary way, sort of approach avoid, just whether or not something is going to move towards or away from. And the cool thing is, obviously, the thing that comes, or maybe even defines the complexity of the system, is that it has nuance. You build nuance in, and it's able to, have a gradient between approach and avoid. And so I think that one of the reasons why you see in non-human primates the strong reactions to the snakes is it sort of falls more, it ticks more of the boxes in the avoid category in terms of its descriptive output. So I can see what you mean. I think that's cogent with how I view it, in that there are certain like statistical learnings about the features, that fall more into the avoid category for especially like for infants and children, especially because infants have much more of a binary output, right? It's like not cry and cry, and these are like their two things, and they kind of go somewhere in between where they're better at not crying for every situation, and then they speak, and then everything changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you think that the fact that a newly hatched chick has object permanence that is much clearer than a human baby would be something that supports what you're saying? That they have a bit more flatter prior,
Yeah.
even on these very basic things that are undoubtedly the case about their environment. That's
Yeah.
what would be an example.
This is a really good point. Yeah, because I think what's going on is a lot of the likelihood for activity, right? Like in the brain. So you have like a likelihood for neurological firing, and then that exhibits itself. What we extract from that is like something like a flat prior, or a weighted prior towards a particular direction. And I do think that there is probably room for that as an evolutionary explanation, where you can get selected for if you have a propensity to for your neurons to fire in a particular way in a particular environment. That probably would be selected for.
Right. So that on the higher level than the neurons, I guess.
Yeah.
That would allow the human baby that doesn't have as strong a prior on object permanence to learn easier to navigate in VR,
Right.
not teleporting, than the chick that could never learn that because it's not possible.
It's not
Something
possible.
like that.
Yeah. It takes too much complexity to be able to process that type of information.
Yeah. And you think that in the distributions of things out there and strategies to deal your environment, the at least potential of flexibility is always helpful.
Yeah, I think that that depending on the weight of the experience, like the weight attributed to the experience, then flexibility is kind of a result. So if I have take trauma for example. So if you and I could have the same experience, we would say that I was traumatized from it if I have less flexibility in my prediction of the outcome in a similar context. So we would say that that's a trauma.
Right.
And so I think flexibility in some cases is highly important. And then the lack of flexibility in other cases is important as well. Like we don't call it a trauma if you see somebody fall off a roof, and then like, every time somebody gets close to a ledge, you're like, be careful. You wouldn't say it's a trauma because there's something we attribute to like a high likelihood that somebody might fall off anyway, right? It's if you hear that somebody dies because they're not using a seatbelt in the car and you start using a seatbelt, you're not traumatized. You're being, what somebody might call rational. You're attributing a correct probability to an outcome. But that lack of flexibility is useful in that case.
Yeah.
But it's not useful in the case of something extremely unlikely happening, somebody getting bitten by a shark, and you hear about it in the news, and then you're like, I can't go in the water anymore if I can't see it. Because all of a sudden you're traumatized from that thing. Whether you experience it or not, you seeing the news and thinking, if I can't see the bottom, a shark is going to come get me, then that's a trauma. So you have a lack of flexibility there, and that's a problem.
But I mean, how do you model rational behavior under this?
I would say I don't like the word rationality anyway. That's why I kind of paused. Is that rationality is so subjective, right? In that even our use of the word trauma is subjective relative to whether or not we accept it societally. So it's acceptable societally to have certain expectations about likely outcomes that are rigid, and it's unacceptable societally to have certain expectations about outcomes that are less likely, because we say, oh, that person is traumatized, and lack of acceptability is just whether or not it's beneficial to the individual to have that expectation.
Okay, but we don't have to use the rationality, but its probabilistic counterpart, like a Bayesian learner
Exactly.
that has the right hypothesis in the hypothesis space and the right weights on their hypothesis. That's
Yes.
what we colloquially say relevant. So
Yeah.
it's irrelevant to overlearn from news of a shark attack. And it's but on the other hand, as you just said, it's relevant to learn quickly. Like
Yes.
if you don't have a learning disability, there's some things that you should learn from one shot or few shots.
Right.
And that makes sense. And then, as you say, we're not calling them trauma, but it's like you're learning the right distributions of things.
Yeah, which is still subjective. Because people have different risk calculations.
But there is sure, this is subjective, but the point is that whatever these people in the same environment and in the same risk profile, they learn to approximate the actual risk profile, right?
Yes. Yeah. Because risk is still, we could both be calculating the same likelihood. We could demonstrate that we both understand what 80% means, but still have different engagements with that 80%. They have different reactions to that 80%, is what I mean. Yeah.
Sure. No, I mean,
Yeah.
of course I agree. I was thinking about some example where it's maybe coming back to the my original question.
Yeah.
Like maybe it makes sense. I mean, it doesn't sound good to say it makes sense to be flexible here and inflexible there, but it makes more sense. It's more acceptable if you hear just learning the relevant stuff. Of course, the relevant can mean anything.
Yeah, that's the thing.
But we agree that it's the relevant stuff that gives the appropriate response. Once you understand in what situation am I in, then I can pick the right strategy. And if I have also the right strategy among my strategies,
Right.
then I get this thing. And of course, this is under unknowns all the time.
Yeah.
So you need to have some sort of thing or collection of things that gives you the best bets over all these things. So my sympathy for some of the stuff that more like evolutionary psychologists would say than the nativists in our field, I guess,
Right.
would be that, well, you have to profit from all the opportunities that are there. That's,
Right.
I guess, where I would be going. So if you are to make if nature made a very efficient system, then it will pick and choose. And sometimes it will overlearn, sometimes it will do something like irrational fears that that economists say that they are irrational, but they're not, as we've seen in many of the Taleb's examples, for example. So maybe it makes sense to be afraid about the water where you don't see the bottom, because there's also, it's not the probability, it's the consequence. Right?
Yes, then that's the thing, is that people attributing weight to the consequence, which I think is also what makes hierarchical Bayesian models such a convincing description, at least, if nothing else. Because what we have is, at the very local level, like even if we build the same likelihood, like the numerator of the equation, our denominators might be built very differently. The things that we're accounting for that build context into the likelihood of the specific outcome is crucial, right? That's really important. But then also where it is in the hierarchy of our model is really important. So I think that that's also what kind of shapes descriptively our attribution of the weight of the outcome, right? And so somebody might say, yeah, that risk that I can't see the bottom of the ocean when I swim is a risk that I'm willing to take because the likelihood is low enough, and I'm willing to take that risk because in my hierarchy the pleasure I get is sufficient, and you can do this for literally anything, whether it's eating pufferfish or hang gliding or getting in a car.
No, totally.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's why these things are so hard, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because you cannot
Exactly.
measure utility correctly.
Nope. Definitely not.
Yeah.
As much as
Yeah.
economists want to.
Yeah.
So what? I think we're actually even past an hour. What what else would you like to discuss? I mean, we can always discuss more later. But if you have anything in mind now, because that's kind of the cover of the. We've covered the information that I wanted to discuss with you specifically.
I think we've touched a little bit on the stuff that are more directly feeding into the same themes. So
Yeah.
I don't know if we have something else right now.
Yeah. Cool.
Like I sort of explained to you why I would be inclined to believe those things. Why do I think about trying to find some learning accelerators, maybe some inductive biases that feeds into the last discussions that is more high level about how to build a rational mind, if you allow me. So I would expect babies to have some of these things, if anything.
Yeah.
If I were to build a perfect baby.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah.
So let me ask you two final questions. If you are forgiving answers to them. The first is, what if you could build sort of an ideal research program, right? What would you build it around? What question would you personally build it around? Like, is there a set of questions that you are drawn to that you can't avoid when you think about things?
Oh wow, that's. I think I have to think about this more because I didn't think about it directly. Like people have some desires about what they would want, but maybe they don't. I think it's an excellent question and something that people should keep front and center into their minds. Actually, now that you say it, I, as of today, I
Yeah,
would be
nice.
interested in something that still plays nicely with this old-ish evolutionary psychology idea that you want to map the specific features that distinguish the human minds. So you would have a list of things that are kind of universal that would be interesting for me. And of course, if you have humans, then there's a lot of things to explain. And I guess everyone is chasing to an extent these things. So, but if these unique things are the results of a combination of many things, I don't think we're ready there to go there yet. So then I would lean into the more the things that are closer to core knowledge in some sense, even if they're not knowledge, but they are core learning biases,
Right.
for example.
Nice.
Because they would be easier to isolate in babies, and that's why I kind of like to work with babies, because I cannot even start thinking about children. Like
Yeah.
the 12-month-olds in our lab, they look so human.
They look so. Looks can be deceiving. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of leads me into, do you what yeah, please.
And actually, from a very different direction, like you seem to be sympathetic to this very powerful and very good statistical learning mechanisms. They seem to appeal to you, and I'm sure these things must be true, and it has to be something good. But as we see more recently in artificial intelligence, people seem to have successes were in overcoming the limits of the amazing LLMs we have by putting either sort of abstract tools or sort of core knowledge or sort of things where the internal representations are understandable and structured and abstract. Things like this that sort of steer all of the horsepower of learning, of the efficient learning, the attention-based mechanism. So that will sort of give me hope in the same direction. That in principle, it's nice to have some sort of structure in there.
Yes, and I think the fact that LLMs only get so far and that they benefit from inputting, say, like modular aspects of cognition, right? Almost to me, given their energy budget and our minimal energy budget, almost shows me that theoretically I can understand why people initially had more modular views of the mind, right? Why the cognitive account was so successful at the time. But it also demonstrates to me that it might be the wrong direction. I don't know, I wouldn't argue very vigorously that it's direct evidence for that. But I do have a suspicion that if you have training sets that are so huge, so inefficient compared to any human child, and that to make them more efficient, you add these modular components, to me that's not demonstrating the importance of the modular components. That's almost showing to me that that's not the right model, that they're useful in a version of the mind that isn't the version that we have. It's a version of creating complex decision making, but it is not the evolutionarily evolved biological version of the mind. Yeah.
So that's very interesting. So you would say that here we have some learning algorithm that is actually not that efficient, and then we can sort of correct it by adding some modular components. And then with babies, you don't have this mixture of modular components and statistical learning, but we have something completely different. And that something completely different would still be, you suggest, a general learning mechanism or a collection of but not large.
Yes.
But very different from the stuff.
I think it would actually be a general learning mechanism, as opposed to an LLM, which is not. Like, we don't have any AI which is a general learning mechanism. It is a robust learning mechanism that isn't generalized. And I think that that's the important thing, is that we're trying to build generality in by introducing modularity. And I think that to me at least, again, this is not like a rigorous argument I'd make, but it's my intuition that that demonstrates that the modularity is useful in that context, but isn't useful for creating general intelligence, which is what we have.
It looks like you're saying about it looks like you're talking more about AGI than humans.
I'm talking about how humans are the general intelligence that we fantasize about recreating, and that we've gone so far in one direction that I don't think is necessarily the right direction if we want to replicate it, right, and to create AGI. We can create something that mimics AGI, right? If we get it big enough, if we introduce enough modularity, we can get it to mimic something like AGI in the same way that at a rudimentary level, LLMs mimic human conversation, right? Maybe in the same way that it sufficiently mimics human conversation, and even certain aspects of human reasoning. Maybe we can get it broad enough, powerful enough, where it mimics even more aspects of human cognition, to the point where it seems like it has AGI. But I don't know if this direction is the right direction for building human-like AGI in terms of the efficiency and the profound generality. I mean, human intelligence is profoundly general in a way that it doesn't seem to me like AI is progressing in that way, because everything we build in is more information, more modules, more information. And it's just like, you need you're getting towards a simulacra of the universe itself, right? And that's not so efficient. If you need a universe the size of the computer, or a computer the size of the universe, to build something as small as a solar system, then it's not efficient. But if you build a computer the size of the solar system that is the solar system, then you've kind of succeeded, you know?
Yeah, for sure. But I'm just thinking that if you would have this thing that you're describing, let's say like a very efficient hierarchical bias thing that learns abstractions and so on, but you would give it the experience of a human child, you would end up with extremely different outcomes after a while of training if you have a child in Turkey versus a child in Denmark. They would end up more different, maybe, than if you would have some universal human nature in there, as I would expect, because you would just have the particulars of your data. Maybe you can, as you're saying, or as you're suspecting, I guess, extract enough abstraction that it doesn't matter and it will come back to the universals and to the generalities out of these things.
Between two infants.
Between two infants with a very different experience.
Sure.
Right? Because you wouldn't have the inductive biases that I'm talking about there, because it's one system that learns out of the data, right? You wouldn't have core knowledge from background, from evolution. You wouldn't have, you wouldn't be steered by, you would have, like, how would the learning system decide that the local custom is just a particularity of that environment and not something that is like a general rule about the world and so on. You get all sorts of local things where you can be extremely efficient in learning these things. And if you want, if you want a learning system that abstracts away from these things and know how these things work, then it's a bit circular. Right?
No.
That drops all the local stuff.
I think the interesting thing is, say you actually build an efficient AGI. The core difference is going to be that human capacities develop in tandem with human experience. You get all these things that emerge purely because the brain and the nervous system is developing at the same time. But if you build an AGI, presumably, turn it on, and it needs to gather the experience, but its capacities are fully built in because it's synthetic. And so that's an interesting thing. So you have the computing power of the 25-year-old adult, but you have the experience of the infant. And that's why you're going to get this difference. Whereas with an infant, you have not only the 25-year trajectory of the development of the nervous system, but you have the learning trajectory. And so these things place constraints on the, emerge as different learnings because of the biases and the different starting conditions in different humans. But the AGI, presumably, you turn on two different AGI, it's going to, if it has the access to the information, it's going to learn identically.
Right. Which reminded me that many psychologists have this sort of default, which it's not all that obvious to me, that the infant mind has limited processing capacity. Why do you think, where is the limitation? Not that it's not, but why would it be that hard for nature to make, to just add more compute if more compute was needed? Or am I misunderstanding you? I'm just thinking that the amount of processing capacity that we measure, especially with the executive function stuff, that I don't think is the best model for this kind of things, but that's another discussion. It's like, it wouldn't be hard to do, the neurons faster. You can build, like nature can build an antelope body in a year, like an adult body. So it wouldn't be a problem to add more of these things if it would make sense. But maybe the bottleneck is somewhere else. Maybe
Oh,
it
you
doesn't
think
make
so?
sense to, given your experience, you're not extracting enough from the experience that is there in order to, human babies get as many calories as they want.
Mhm.
So it wouldn't be like it's not a limit of growth.
You don't think so? You don't think that, wait, maybe we're not talking about the same thing, but you're saying that the development of the human mind, of the human brain, like specifically the nervous system, the structure of the nervous system that takes, say, 25 years to fully develop, you're saying that you could come out with a fully developed nervous system.
You could build it relatively quickly. Why not?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think that it's too intensive for the human body carrying that infant, right? In the same, I think that the nervous system developing requires a bunch of things like a fully developed body, a larger cranium, right? More, yeah. I think the immune system plays a crucial role. We see like that certain parts of the brain develop when you have different components of the nervous system, of the immune system built in. I don't think that you could, if I'm understanding correctly what you're saying, that you could give birth to a human infant that has a fully developed nervous system, given the.
Maybe not. But
Yeah,
let's say you can, instead of 25 years, you can get 2 years to get there.
Maybe. I mean, here's the thing that we're running up against is that neither of us has the like biological background to know whether or not certain things just take a lot of time. And I know that the immune system does take time to develop. So like, you know, one example is your lymph nodes, whereas your blood, goes through your body, the red blood cells kind of travel through constantly. Your lymph nodes, things travel so slowly through your lymphatic system. Your immune cells sometimes take 10 days to reach a thing. So how many of those cycles have you had at 2 years? And if you're looking at the lymphatic system's drainage for going from microglia to glia to be able to develop like certain pathways in the white matter, wow, you're looking at a lot of cycles. And it could be that this takes just time, that we don't have like the sufficient circulatory system. So like maybe that like these limitations are biological in a way that I don't know. So I would remain agnostic about whether or not you could get to the full development of the nervous system within 2 years.
But would you, back to the antelope, they can build these big bodies, these completely adult bodies with a completely adult immune systems, right? And then if you want, if it's a brain size issue, you can just look at something like elephants, or if you want. And then they are slower, of course, but they are not as slow as humans.
Mm-hmm. But they also do less than humans. Like especially the brain is obviously immeasurably less complex. I mean, you're talking about 100 billion neurons versus 100 million neurons in an elephant.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have like elephants, dolphins, dogs.
Right.
Like approaching about 100 million, 150 million. We have 100 billion on our end.
Right.
The scalar difference is enormous.
So then if you look at something like the neuron density of a bird, you would just need to scale the life of a bird to get to the amount of neurons. Like a newly hatched chick of an intelligent species gets to adulthood in a year or so.
Right.
But if you want to actually get to the number of neurons of people, you have to spend that many more years.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and I may look like I'm contradicting myself because I was talking about trade-offs at the beginning. But in my background, it wasn't that. I'm saying that you have these trade-offs because you want to optimally use the experience and the opportunities that are given to you. So it doesn't make sense to have an antelope body if you have the mind of a 2-year-old, because that may be dangerous and counterproductive in terms of fitness. If you had like a lot of force and mobility, and maybe it makes sense to be relatively immobile if you want to learn these many things that's kind of circular to say, well, how do you know it makes sense? Well, let's see.
Yeah.
Maybe we can prove something, maybe we can't. But the only point is that it's not very clear to me, and I've also looked a little bit into this, but I wouldn't bet on anything in my knowledge, that you just need to you're limited by the rate of growth of some cells,
Yeah, for sure.
and you are.
Yeah, definitely. I think because you need, like, the caloric input is huge. There's already a large demand on, like, a mother, say, right? Like, there's already a huge caloric demand, and I don't, like, there are reasons why, obviously, so many of the trade-offs of why humans come out with a less developed body, because there's so much caloric demand of the brain, and that's a trade-off. And also, humans have the largest, like, infant to body ratio. So human women give birth to the largest offspring of anywhere else in the animal kingdom, which also is super interesting. So even when you have something like an antelope, the proportion of the antelope to the offspring is greater than the proportional size difference to the human human infant. So I think that these limitations are really important to take into account.
So does this predict that there would be selection to maximize the rate of cell producing in this in humans?
I don't know what pressure. I can't imagine an environment where that pressure is necessary if you have, because you have so many systems pre-human that are building nurturing systems that are successful. I don't know if you have any pressure that would make the cell division somehow more rapid for any particular reason. Like, take for example that the gestation of an elephant is, I think, 12 months. It's either 11 or 12 months. So it's longer than human. It's just a mass difference. Like, already the human takes a long time, specifically because the brain takes so much time. But the elephant takes a lot of time, not because it's developing anywhere near as complex a brain, but because it has just so much tissue to build.
So the explore-exploit trade-off that people like Alison Gopnik talk about, where the limitation is the experience that the more flexible animals have this longer childhood because the bottleneck is experience. That is not an argument counter what you're saying, because this experience needs to be supported at the limit of growth by the consumption and amount of brain.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah, cool. That was great. I'm glad we took that tangent. And I guess just to wrap up, why do you do what you do? Like, why do you do what drew you to cognitive science in the first place?
A long time ago, I kept running through different projects. As you know, I've done arts and then design, and then something about literature that you probably don't know of.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
And then when I finished my first master
in literature,
in sort of like the art of the novel. I don't even know how it would be translated.
Yeah. Cool. From Romanian.
Yeah. Then I had this epistemological crisis. What do I know? Well, I don't know anything. Actually, it was quite exciting to have this feeling.
Yeah.
And then soon after, I found that there's such a thing as decision theory, and it was like, oh, so cool. That would explain why I'm taking all these bad decisions. That got me into cognitive science somehow, and it seemed extremely exciting. And then I figured that there's a cognitive science master's, a very good one in Bucharest. And then,
nice.
it was, I just moved there directly.
Cool.
And it was kind of obvious that this is the most interesting thing. So why do I do this? Well, I think it's fun.
Yeah, nice. Wow, I'm glad you made your way into it.
Thanks.
Cool. So I guess let's wrap up there. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
if in the next month we can manage to sit down again, let's do it.
Yeah,
Okay, right.
really. Super. Thanks a lot.